I had been a litigation director for the United Earth Diplomatic Commission for 19 years. And in that time, I had faced down corporate cartels, sovereign disputes, resource wars dressed up as trade disagreements, and one genuinely bizarre incident involving a contested moon and 17 competing inheritance claims. I had never, until the Krath arrived, been told that my client's settlement would be burned from orbit unless we sent someone to die for it. Let me tell you about the Krath. Not the version in the diplomatic briefings, sanitized and measured and careful not to cause undue panic. The real version. The version that gets passed around in hushed conversations at interstellar summits. The version that makes hardened military advisors go quiet when a name comes up. The Krath Dominion had been a galactic power for over 300 years. In that time, they had conquered or absorbed 23 distinct civilizations. Not defeated, not negotiated into submission. Conquered, completely, thoroughly, in ways that left no ambiguity about who had won and who had lost. The Munis Concordat, the same neutral body that had observed our treaty negotiation with the Terati, had a formal classification system for galactic threats. 5 tiers. The Krath were the only species in recorded interstellar history to have ever been classified Tier 5. Tier 5 meant, do not engage under any circumstances without overwhelming numerical superiority, and even then, reconsider. Physically, a Krath warrior was something that evolution had apparently designed by asking the question, what if we made something that existed purely to end other things? They stood between 8 and 9 feet tall on digitigrade legs that could propel them to sprinting speeds that outpaced most light ground vehicles. Their arms had a span nearly twice their standing height. Their hide, it wasn't skin, not really, the xenobiologists were very specific about this, was a dense layered biological armor, overlapping plates of keratin composite material that field testing had shown capable of absorbing direct small arms fire without meaningful penetration. They had 4 sensory organs where humans had 2 eyes, giving them effectively panoramic vision with no blind spots. Their pain response, according to capture medical data, was fundamentally different from most species. They did not experience pain as a deterrent. They experienced it as information. They had a word in their language, Krath, that translated approximately as the moment when prey understands it cannot escape. It was considered, in their culture, the most sacred moment in existence. They built temples to it. They taught their children to recognize it. Their military doctrine, their philosophy, their religion, everything orbited around that single concept. They had never, in 300 years of recorded conflict, lost a trial by combat. Not once. Other species knew this. The Yelani Collective had demanded a trial by combat against the Krath 80 years ago over a territorial dispute. The Yelani champion, a decorated military commander of their most elite warrior caste, had lasted 4 minutes. The Drevithi Confederation, whose warriors were considered the second most physically capable species in the known galaxy, had attempted trial by combat 40 years ago. Their champion had lasted 6 minutes and had reportedly been in a medically induced state of psychological shock for 3 years afterward, unable to speak about what had happened. The Sethani had tried 30 years ago. Their champion had not survived. After the Sethani, nobody tried anymore. When a dispute with the Krath arose, species settled. They gave up the territory, paid the tribute, accepted the terms, and they were grateful to walk away with their populations intact. The Galactic Arbitration Council, the closest thing the known galaxy had to an interstellar court, had a standing internal policy document that was not publicly acknowledged but was very much real. I had read a copy. It said, in the careful language of institutional cowardice, in disputes involving Krath Dominion territorial claims, arbitration bodies are encouraged to facilitate rapid settlement in favor of Krath interests in order to preserve broader galactic stability. In other words, give them what they want. It's easier. This was the context in which I found myself, 19 years into a career that had not prepared me for any of it, sitting across a conference table from High Arbiter Voskethra of the Krath Dominion and his delegation of 7, in neutral station in the Shiran system, with 12,000 civilians on Verada Colony, waiting to find out if they still had a home. The Krath did not do small talk. Voskethra entered the chamber and sat, and the sheer physical fact of him was something you couldn't prepare for even with briefings and photographs and video footage. The photographs didn't capture the way the air in the room seemed to reorganize itself around him. The footage didn't convey the quality of his stillness, not the stillness of patience or calm, but the stillness of something that had never needed to move quickly because nothing had ever successfully run from it. His delegation arranged themselves behind him. They did not sit. They stood, evenly spaced, and they watched the room the way a security detail watches a room. Except the security detail watches for threats, and the Krath watched the way something watches when it is itself the most dangerous thing present and is simply cataloging the contents of its environment. My assistant, a young woman named Priya on her third diplomatic assignment, had gone very still beside me. I didn't blame her. I had read every piece of documentation on the Krath I could find in the 2 weeks since this dispute had been formally escalated to my desk, and I was still finding the physical reality of them somewhat difficult to process in real time. I straightened my jacket, opened my case file, and said, "Hi, Arbiter Voskethra. Thank you for attending. I'm Director Callum Reyes, representing the United Earth Diplomatic Commission and the residents of Verada Colony. I'd like to begin by establishing the formal record of this proceeding." Voskethra looked at me the way a mountain looks at weather. "There is no proceeding," he said. His translator rendered his voice as something low and textured, like sound produced by an instrument that had been designed for a different atmosphere. "There are terms. Your settlement occupies ground that belongs to the Dominion by right of the Third Covenant of Expansion. You will vacate, or you will be removed. This meeting exists as a courtesy." "I appreciate the courtesy," I said, "and I want to engage with your position seriously, which is why I prepared a formal response to the territorial claim under Galactic Arbitration Council Protocols, Article 7, Section. We do not recognize GAC jurisdiction over Dominion territorial matters. You signed the Interstellar Compact of 2341, which incorporated GAC jurisdiction as a binding. We signed an agreement that has since been superseded by the Dominion's expansion edicts." He said it without heat, without irritation. He said it the way you state the temperature outside, factual, indifferent, already moving past it. "Director Reyes, I will simplify this for you. Your settlement has 30 days. At the end of 30 days, if your people remain, our fleet will ensure they do not remain further. There is no legal framework you can construct that changes this outcome. We have had this conversation with other species. They understood eventually." He meant the Yolani. He meant the Drevathi. He meant the Sethani. I'll let the silence sit for a moment. Beside me, Priya was writing very small, precise notes. "Hi, Arbiter," I said. "I understand your position. I want to offer an alternative process. Not because I think it will change your mind about the territory, but because I think it gives both parties a cleaner resolution with clearer galactic standing. Under the compact you referenced, either party in a territorial dispute may invoke Clause 14. Trial by combat, single champion per side, outcome binding on both parties with full GAC witness record." The room changed. It was subtle. The Krath delegation didn't move. They were always still, but the quality of their stillness shifted. Voskethra's 4 sensory organs fixed on me with an attention that hadn't been there before. "You are invoking trial by combat," he said. "I'm offering it as an option. If the Dominion accepts, the outcome is binding. If your champion wins, Verada Colony is evacuated within 60 days. No further dispute. Full legal settlement on record. If our champion wins, the territorial claim is withdrawn and the colony's right of residence is formally recognized under GAC Charter." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. Then Voskethra did something I had not seen in any of the footage or documentation. He leaned back in his chair, just slightly, and he looked at me with an expression that I can only describe, inadequately, as almost amused. "Director Reyes," he said, "are you aware of our record in trial by combat?" "I am." "Are you aware of what happened to the Sethani champion?" "I've read the reports. The Drevathi champion required medical intervention for 3 years. I am aware. No species has invoked trial by combat against the Dominion in 30 years. He paused. And you are invoking it on behalf of a colony of farmers and administrators. 12,000 civilians, I said. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. We accept, he said. The trial was scheduled for 72 hours later, on the station's combat floor, a large circular space used for exactly this purpose, with observation galleries that could seat several hundred witnesses. Word had spread through the station with the particular speed that genuinely extraordinary news travels. By the time the proceedings were formally announced, requests for observer credentials had come in from 41 species. The Galactic Arbitration Council dispatched a senior witness delegation. 3 separate interstellar news services requested coverage access. Everyone wanted to see which human had been sent to die. I spent the 72 hours doing what I always did. Working, filing the formal invocation paperwork, confirming witness credentials, reviewing the compact language around trial by combat procedures to make sure every clause was airtight. Priya brought me food at irregular intervals and asked, twice, with the careful tone of someone trying not to sound as alarmed as they were, whether I was certain about this. Yes, I told her both times. Director Reyes, she said the second time, setting down a container of something hot and sitting across from me. The Drevithi champion. The report said. I know what the report said. He was their greatest warrior. Decorated. Extensively trained. And he, Priya. I looked up from my documents. Have you ever wondered why we couldn't find recordings of most of Director Vasquez's previous negotiations? She blinked. What does that have to do with? Because the outcomes were so complete that the other parties requested the records be sealed. I went back to my documents. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be fine. She left, still looking uncertain. That was fair. I had not told her everything. I had not told anyone everything, because in my experience, the less people knew about certain things in advance, the more effectively those things worked. What I had done, in the 48 hours after the Krath dispute landed on my desk, and I had read the full briefing file and understood what was coming, was make a single call. Not to the military, not to the Commission Security Division, to a woman named Coordinator Holloway, who worked in a department that was not listed in any public UEDC directory, and whose title was not coordinator of anything in particular, and who had listened to my summary of the situation in complete silence, and then said, in a tone suggesting I had asked her to arrange a grocery delivery, I'll send someone. His name is Danson. He'll arrive in 36 hours. Don't brief him. He'll read the file himself. Marcus Danson arrived 34 hours later, 2 hours ahead of schedule, which I later understood was characteristic. He was the most unremarkable human being I had ever seen. I mean that with complete precision and no exaggeration. He was average height, perhaps 5 feet 10. Average build, the kind that suggested someone who stayed fit without being particularly large about it. Brown hair, cut short without any particular style. A face that was neither handsome nor plain, the kind of face that disappeared from memory almost immediately after you looked away from it. He wore civilian clothes that fit him adequately. He carried a small bag. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm and completely unmemorable. He sat across from me, read the file I handed him in 11 minutes, and looked up. Krath champion, he said. Do we know who they're sending? Not yet. They'll announce at the proceedings. He nodded once. Okay. Do you need anything? Equipment, preparation time, medical. No. He considered for a moment. Coffee would be fine. I got him coffee. He drank it and looked out the window at the stars. And I watched him and tried to find something in his face or his posture that explained why Coordinator Holloway had sent him specifically, and found nothing. He looked like someone waiting for a connecting flight. Mr. Danson, I said, I need to ask you directly. The Krath champion will be. I know what the Krath champion will be, he said, without any particular emphasis. I've read their combat record, and you're comfortable. He looked at me then, and for just a moment, half a second, maybe less, there was something in his eyes that was not remarkable at all. It was the opposite of remarkable. It was so far beyond remarkable that it had come out the other side into something that had no good name, something that made the air in the room feel briefly different, The same way the air in a room feels different when you realize something you thought was a shadow is not a shadow. Then it was gone, and he was just a man drinking coffee. "Yes," he said, "I am comfortable." The combat floor held 412 witnesses the following morning. I sat in the observer section with Priya, who had not slept. Representatives from 41 species filled the galleries around us, and the noise of them, translated murmurs, the clicking and humming and resonant communication of beings from across the known galaxy, created a sound like a living thing. Everyone had come to watch a human die. Not cruelly, mostly. Many of them had come with genuine sympathy, the particular helpless sympathy of witnesses to an outcome that everyone can see but nobody can stop. The Krath entered first. Their champion's name, the formal announcer stated, was Krath. He had competed in 41 formal combats for the Dominion. He had won all 41. He was not the largest Krath I had seen in documentation, but he was the most. There was no other word composed. He moved into the combat circle with the absolute economy of something that had never wasted a motion in its life. He carried no weapon. The Krath rarely did in trial by combat. Their body was the weapon. That was the point. The gallery had gone very quiet. Krath stood in the circle and looked at the human entrance and waited, and the quality of his waiting was the quality of the Krath concept of Krathavos made physical, the absolute certainty of an outcome, patient as geology. Marcus Danson walked in. The gallery's quiet became a different kind of quiet. He walked at a normal pace, hands loose at his sides, wearing the same civilian clothes he'd worn when he arrived. He had not changed. He had not, as far as I could tell, brought anything. He walked to the edge of the combat circle and stopped and looked at Krath with the same expression he'd worn looking out the window at the stars. Mild interest. Nothing more. Somewhere in the gallery, someone said something in Drevithi that my implant translated as "that is their champion." Krath looked at Marcus Danson. He looked for a long time. He was, I realized, doing what all the Krath did, cataloging, assessing, finding the measure of the thing in front of him and placing it in his understanding of the world. Whatever he found, or didn't find, something shifted in his posture. Not much. The tiniest reorganization of his weight. The Krath were not capable of the particular human expression of confusion, but if they had been, I think it would have looked like what Krath's face did in that moment. The formal announcer completed the procedural statements. Both parties confirmed their understanding of the terms. The GAC witness on record stated the outcome would be binding. The signal was given. Marcus Danson had already moved. I have reviewed the station's recording of the next 10 seconds many times since. It does not get easier to process. He crossed the distance between them in a way that didn't look like running. It looked like the space between them ceased to be relevant. Krath, whose reflexes field documentation described as faster than most species could consciously track, began to react. Marcus was already inside his reach, already moving in a direction that Krath's body hadn't finished deciding to cover, already doing 3 things simultaneously that I do not have the technical vocabulary to describe accurately. The first sound was not a strike. I don't know exactly what it was. Something structural, something that spoke to a deep and specific knowledge of how a Krath body was assembled and where its architecture was less certain of itself. Krath made a sound I had never heard in any documentation of any Krath ever. A short sound. Surprised. The second thing happened. And the third. 7 seconds. Krath was on the floor of the combat circle. Not unconscious. His eyes were open, all 4 of them, fixed on the ceiling of the chamber. He was breathing. He was, by any medical definition, alive and physically functional. He could have stood up. He did not stand up. Marcus Danson stood beside him and looked down, and his breathing was indistinguishable from what it had been when he'd walked in. He wasn't winded. He wasn't injured. He looked like someone who had just completed a task of moderate complexity and was confirming it was finished. The gallery was absolutely silent. 10 seconds after the signal had been given, Marcus Danson looked up at the GAC witness and said, in a perfectly conversational tone, "For the record." That was all he said. Then he walked back out the way he'd come in. Krath lay on the combat floor for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before he stood up. I timed it. The medical team moved toward him, and he waved them off, which took visible effort. He stood. He looked at the space where Marcus Danson had been. He looked for a long time. Then he looked at me across the chamber, and I understood that I was the closest available target for the thing he needed to express. And I held his gaze because that was my job, and after a long moment he looked away. The formal outcome was recorded. Territorial claim withdrawn. Verada Colony's residency rights recognized under GAC Charter, binding and permanent. The GAC witness sealed the record with 17 countersignatures from the observer species in attendance. Priya was writing very fast and saying nothing. I found Marcus Danson in the corridor outside the chamber, standing at a viewport looking at the stars the same way he'd looked at them from my office. I stood beside him for a moment. "Thank you," I said. "Yes," he said, the acknowledgement of a man completing a transaction. I watched the stars with him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "The way you moved in there. What you did." I considered how to phrase it. I've read the Drevathy reports. Their champion, the psychological state he was in afterward. The Sethani champion didn't survive. You did something different. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The Krath have never lost a trial by combat," he said. "In 300 years. 41 civilizations." He paused. "Do you know what that does to something? To never lose. To walk into a fight and already know the outcome because the outcome has always been the same." "It makes them confident," I said. "It makes them certain," he said. "Confidence you can fight through. Certainty is different. Certainty means you've stopped solving the problem. You're just waiting for the answer you already know." He looked at the stars. I just showed him an answer he'd never seen before. "That's all." He picked up his bag from where he'd set it against the wall. "He'll be okay," he added, which I had not asked but had been wondering. "Physically. The rest takes longer." He walked toward the transit bay without ceremony, the most unremarkable man in the known galaxy, and I watched him go and thought about Grathorn lying on the floor of the combat circle looking at the ceiling, and about the sound he'd made, that short surprise sound, and about 300 years of absolute certainty meeting 10 seconds of Marcus Danson. And I thought about 12,000 people on Verada Colony who were going to wake up tomorrow and not know how close it had been, or what had happened here, or what the most unremarkable man any of us had ever seen had done in 10 seconds in a combat circle, while the representatives of 41 species watched in complete silence. They didn't need to know. That was fine. I went back to file the paperwork.